And you also said something that really spoke to me. You said, there will be a moment when we learn to live within Earth's limits. I love that line because it really does add to philosophy. It adds to our understanding and says, listen, okay, yeah, Earth has its limits and we're currently pushing them, and we're seeing a lot of pushback, right? Whether it is the virus, whether it is global warming and fires in Australia and cyclones and all this crazy stuff that's happening, there is going to be a shift. What I'm wondering, I guess the core question is, if you think back to when the world was deriving its energy from, say, whale blubber, right? And there was a big scare over, oh my gosh, we're running out of whales. What are we going to do? Everybody's panicking. And then all of a sudden they find a new energy source.
And that was the solution to our problem. Yeah.
But I tend to think, we're going to come up with that solution. I just think that it's a matter of time, and it's not going to happen until there is literally no money to be made in fossil fuels. Like they're going to drain the earth of their fossil fuels because there's still money in it. Do you think we can move on before the economic incentive is gone?
Well, if we're going to, we better hurry up because time is running out fast. I mean, the oil industry is just in tatters right now. Basically for the last 10, we used up all the cheap oil before about 2005. And so oil was getting more and more expensive. In 2007, we had this price run up for global oil. And that was one of the contributors to the Great Recession of 2008. Actually, it reached a peak of almost $150 a barrel in the middle of 2008, and that was part of the trigger for the crisis. And so, what happened? That incentivized then the extraction of lower quality, more expensive to produce oil, like the tar sands in Canada, like the tight oil in the U.S. Produced from hydrofracturing and horizontal drilling. And for the next 10 years, a significant amount of new supply came on from these high-cost sources. The companies that were specializing in these new sources weren't making any money. I mean, with rare exceptions, they were spending more money in drilling than they were making in sales of product. But it was the next big thing, and a huge amount of money had been injected into the financial system in order to solve the Great Recession. So that money was finding its way to the frackers because, after all, they needed to invest it somewhere. And here were these people who had this miraculous new technology and lots of oil wells and so on. Now, with the coronavirus pandemic, the demand for oil has fallen off dramatically. And so oil prices have fallen. A couple of weeks ago, they were actually in negative territory. The barrel of oil was selling for negative $37 a barrel. How is that even possible? It's crazy. So all of the oil companies are suffering. ExxonMobil, which invested heavily in fracking over the last few years, is now in very, very bad shape. And the hundreds of smaller companies that only produce the high cost tight oil and tar sands they're toast. And there's no coming back. So if we were going to make a systemic, graduated, rational, controlled move away from our dependence on oil, we missed the opportunity. From here on out, it's going to be very chaotic. The oil industry is going to be collapsing in fits and starts, and we don't have something to replace it. We have a few electric cars, but there's no incentive for anyone to buy electric cars because oil is so cheap. But because oil is so cheap, the oil industry is cratering. And if the oil industry tries to recover, if it gets bailed out by the government, that sends oil prices higher, and the whole thing just starts over again. It's completely dysfunctional, and we missed our chance, basically.